for the audience, however much you can share, like what exactly is an intelligence officer, especially what your role was?
I was at the most tactical level of intelligence, leading a team that supported an infantry battalion, which a Marine infantry battalion can range anywhere from 500 to 800 Marines. Working
Wow.
with the CIA, DIA, NSA, and going out with a very small team to every crisis in the world, providing a direct link back if that commander needed something from the White House sit room. As a 25-year-old, I had authorization to call the White House sit room. I mean, it was
Wow.
really heady stuff. Yes, it was so cool. Funny thing about vets is because everybody's making the same amount of money, they do talk about money fairly freely, unlike, some civilian counterparts where it's a little bit, and even civilian companies where it's a little bit taboo, to talk about that. Our number one company value, and it's a value that I have carried my entire career, is relationships over revenue always. So there's no placement fee worth it to me to sacrifice that.
Welcome to another episode of Gentle Power. We didn't start it with our classic hello, hello. We usually go hello, hello. Welcome to an episode of Gentle Power. We are very excited to welcome our guest, Jim Lose of the Military Veteran. We have known about the Military Veteran for quite some time because, Jim, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Brendan and I were classmates at Wharton Business School, and that's how we originally met. So especially once we had started our business, Brendan had already started the Military Veteran. He was putting out a lot of posts on LinkedIn and doing really, really cool stuff with the career conferences and everything. So we stayed in touch. I think right when we started our business,
yes.
One of the first podcast episodes that Gerta ever did was on the Military Veteran podcast. It was a couple of years ago.
But I gave a talk at that in-person event as well.
Yeah, in San Francisco, I think about 2 years ago, the Military Veteran put on a really big career conference for veterans. And Gerta gave, at the time, it was the biggest talk that you had given. So, yeah. But Jim, we are so excited to welcome you. We have... Of course, we have a pretty broad audience, and there are lots of people like ourselves who were in the military and also transitioning. But I think also the principles of transitioning to a new career, progressing in your career from mid-career to the executive levels. And I think it's quite applicable to people who are considering changing industries or even changing companies. I think there are lots of lessons to extract here. So Jim, would love to turn it over to you. Would love to hear a bit more about your background, your intro. And our podcast is about negotiations and power, and would love to hear about how you have encountered negotiations in your career. And there are a few other questions that I was super curious about in the work that you do with veterans who are transitioning to private sector and executives as well. So Jim, over to you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Alex. And real pleasure to meet both you and Gerta today. And I appreciate you both. It's a joy to be on your podcast, so thank you. My story starts in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, a real small, very small town in farm country, Pennsylvania. And, my father was in the ministry, so I was a preacher's kid. My mom was in education, so really had no business background whatsoever. Went to college. I majored in Russian because I thought maybe it'd be cool to go in the Marine Corps and be an intelligence officer, and it worked out that way. So after college, joined the Marines, wanted to serve the country like, a lot of veterans kind of do that, serve and get out. My goal was never a career, but it was a ton of fun. It was, I found my people for sure. And in the Marine Corps, starting out, I was a, battalion intelligence officer, and then also had responsibilities as a Scout Sniper platoon commander, leading about 40 Scout Sniper Marines. And then from there, moved up in your normal military career. Got to the point where you're kind of deciding stay in and get out. And I decided to do a second tour with a really incredible unit out of the Pentagon, the National Intelligence Support Team at the time, which provided intel links. It was directly to the warfighter in the field back in the day when that was very hard to do. And so that was an awesome tour, did a second tour, and then I got out of the Marines. And I wanted to continue to help the community. I really fell in love with the military, but again, just wasn't, ever in my plan to stay in for 20. And that's when I decided becoming a headhunter could help the community. So, which I think, a lot of people, when they think about serving, they don't think about headhunters. But indeed, the company I joined at the time was Lucas Group, which put more than 50,000 vets to work during its existence. When I was there, I worked at, started at working at desk and then grew into kind of overseeing East Coast operations for the business in the military veteran space, and placed about 3,000, transitioning junior officers into corporate America, your big Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 firms. And over time, as my candidates who I placed in my early part of the career needed assistance later in their career as they kind of built their executive profiles, they had no one to call in the space who really understood the veteran part of their backgrounds. So after about 10 years or so, I became that guy. Hey, I know someone, call Jim. And so quickly enough, there were a lot of vets in business who were experiencing the same problem. And so I moved more from the transitioning, junior executive level to more so executive level, and just by the nature of my candidates growing their careers. So that took me to Korn Ferry. I was with Korn Ferry as a principal for 3 years, doing adjacent work, not really as much in the veteran space, and then left to just join a startup with Brendan Aronson, Tim Shaw, our founders, both combat veterans, who built the MilVet really out of necessity. Just they were involved in a nonprofit called Service to Schools, which places and really mentors, not places, enlisted veterans, and then also people going to grad school. But where 10 years ago, Alex and Gerta, there were no veteran students practically at your Ivy Leagues, at your top institutions. Now there are, in large part because of the service to school mentors. There are thousands. And when those graduates were graduating, they had some, just needed some help finding employment or full employment. And that's where the MilVet kind of grew out of. And Tim and Brendan founded it. And so where we are today is our focus is primarily we are working with veterans and serving as a pathway for them into their executive career at that point in their career. And those searches look like everything from general manager, director of operations, COO, CEO, VP of ops, chief growth officer, chief of staff, which is, of course, an amazing role for a vet to step into, all the go-to-market various kind of roles, and then certainly mission ops. And so that's where a lot of our work has been. We are primarily working with early stage, high growth companies, so think private equity or venture backed, and we are helping them build out their leadership and go-to-market teams with veteran executives.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Also, as you were sharing about your background, because I also am a veteran, I served in the Air Force, and the origin story is often, why did you want to join the military? I want to serve my country. I want to give back. And I think you and I both share that. So I also mentor high school students who are applying to the service academies, and I will do mock interviews with them. And I had recently, I had this kind of oh my gosh moment where a very common answer when I was when I was applying to the Air Force Academy was, why do you want to join the military? Once 9/11 happened and I just realized I really want to serve this country and help protect America and all these things. That was a very common answer. Recently, when I asked this to those who are applying to the service academies, they say, I learned about 9/11 in my history class. and so thus I want to join my country. And I'm like, oh my gosh, has it been that long since I've served? And, but thank you so much for sharing this origin story. So Gerta and I, we have a business where we help people with negotiations, whether they are applying to jobs and we help them negotiate their compensation, or if we also work with founders and businesses, help them with B2B deals. One thing that I have found about veterans, and I think this is also applicable to those who are probably changing careers is that they really undersell themselves. At least, especially for veterans, when they leave the military and they're going into the private sector. And I've done resume reviews with veterans too, and I'll look at their resumes, and they often have their bullets or the experience that they share. It captures either just a fraction, or it really doesn't convey the gravity or how impressive their accomplishments actually were. And I think that this then translates into negotiations. When they're negotiating their compensation, you don't negotiate your pay in the military, right? You're just paid what you're told, and then once you go. And I think this mentality, especially when we've had veteran clients, is pretty hard to break, or we almost need to retrain them. But I'm curious your take on how people should, not undersell themselves, and what they should do to really make sure that their experience is commensurate with what they should deserve.
It's tricky, especially for the transitioning veteran getting out. It's tricky as far as not over. You have a couple different ways that people tend to lean. One is, I'm CEO of the unit, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so overstating exactly like, well, it's not exactly CEO, commander. It's a little bit different, and there are different responsibilities and, overall, just different roles. But then you have the other thing that you're talking about, where they truly don't know what their worth is, and so that's a little bit more challenging. Like, how do I figure that out? I mean, a great market data is, if you have friends who got out the year before. I mean, it's like, and they're usually, the funny thing about vets is, because everybody's making the same amount of money, they do talk about money fairly freely, unlike some civilian counterparts where it's a little bit, and even civilian companies where it's a little bit taboo, to talk about that.
That's a great insight.
Yeah, actually, that hadn't occurred to me, but I realize you're right, because how much is getting paid based off of the rank that they have on their shoulder.
Time and service.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's all out there, but on the outside, they have to kind of figure out, like, what is my worth? And so working with 20 years worth of transitioning vets, it's first and foremost, let's find out, what do you want to do, go through their whole criteria, and then talk about, like, okay, this is where we're seeing historically, and also based on the market, the location, all of that, taking everything into account. But then I always encourage them, interview, try not to be as selective in the beginning of the process, be selective a little bit later when you have a lot of activity, a lot of interests, and then offers are coming in. What better time to be real selective when you're selecting which offer to go to work for? And really, at that point, they are starting to find out their worth. If I have 3 offers coming in and they're all kind of tightly grouped, or, somewhat tightly grouped, then it kind of is telling you, 120 is where your corporate America, at least the small sample size you've seen, values you.
I also, what I've noticed is that I wonder if there's also a culture of humility in the military, because so Alex used to be a base jumper, and I've asked him, and everyone is so surprised when they find out, like, what this is. It's one of the like, in some ratings, the most dangerous sport in the entire world. And a lot of our friends, when it comes up casually, they're shocked. And then I'm like, Alex, you should post about it. People should know this part of you. And he's like, oh, I think you've said something like it's part of the, there was a term, even if I remember correctly, like the community, the base jumping community looks down on people who brag about it. Is that right?
It's like, it's like, there are those who say they call themselves base jumpers or skydivers, and then there are those who just skydive and base jump because they enjoy it, right? But I think also that humility comes from the military, because I first learned parachuting and skydiving. I was on the Air Force parachute team, and I was an instructor, and a really big part of, and I think this is just the military culture, is you just get the job done. You don't wear it like a badge of honor, or it's not something to be proud about. Is, hey, this is my duty, and I do it, and you don't really need to talk about it. And when I joined the private sector, Gerta, having been in the private sector her whole career, really coached me when it came to the actual negotiating for job offers. I am much better now where I'm able to
awesome.
consult and teach others. But there was I remember there are times when you would say, when I would get the offer and I'm just ready to accept it. I'm like, okay, this is how much they're paying. It looks good to me. Let's go ahead. But you're just like, no, you can ask for more.
Yeah.
And there was a really big just reframe that happened. And the longer I've spent time in the private sector, I've seen how much more value is actually on the table. It's just all part of this game, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
I have so much to say there. I think the biggest difference, though, with Alex has been because you were an instructor for the parachute team at the Air Force. And so I imagine in that type of role, you have to over communicate by a lot because people's lives are on the line. So you were over communicating a lot. And then that's what made you an excellent product marketing and product person in big tech. Alex was always exceeding expectations all the time. But then that's the one thing that actually makes you a good employee and then a great, amazing employee, but not that good of a negotiator because you're oversharing.
The over communication. Yeah.
And you touched on a great point, though, as far as in the military, especially in the officer ranks and any leadership role, you're not self-promoting. It's taught from the very beginning as a second lieutenant. You pass on the praise to your subordinates and highlight their achievements, not your own. And so I can certainly see spill over into, it's part of in interview coaching with veterans for years. It's like you need to own the achievements now. And there's a way to talk about it that is not braggy or, you're sucking all the oxygen out of the room. You can talk about it as, working very hard and reaping the results of that hard work.
Yeah.
So I would like to go back to something you said because it really piqued my interest. You said that you were an intelligence officer at some point, correct?
For 8 years. Yeah. Plus one
8 years.
bonus year. Yeah. So 9, I guess, total. I got recalled.
Yeah. So I would not do our audience justice to not double click on that. I'm curious as to if they taught you anything related to power and negotiation in that type of role. That's one question. And the other is like, what did you learn by being an intelligence officer? I imagine there's at least some aspect of it has to do with power and negotiations and minimum communication.
I was going to touch on the communication piece. So I'll touch on that first. As far as what did you learn? You learn how to public speak really well. You need to, distill information that is critical for a commander as an intelligence officer. You are painting, and you're also, a lot of times, you can be the bearer of bad news. You are a little bit poking holes from the enemy perspective into the, friendly forces plans. So if you go up and you are, fumbling with your notes and you're lacking confidence, man, they smell blood in the water and they attack. I was the commandant. When I was recalled, it was not to go kick in doors in Iraq or Afghanistan. I was backfilling, and I was the commandant of the Marine Corps, the number one officer in the Marine Corps, his briefer for the intelligence scenario of what was happening overseas. So, it was every general on the general staff and the Marines there every week for the commandant's meeting. And certainly a little stressful, but also that blood in the water piece, they definitely, if you had to be confident, you had to have your public speaking down. Negotiating wise, though, Gerta, I don't know, beyond that public speaking, it's certainly, you are as an intelligence officer, you must be able to read the room and to perceive how other people are feeling. So from that standpoint, that certainly, I'm sure, helps me. But there wasn't any, specific kind of training or, thing that you would go through. Where you would find that in the military, I'm sure, is civil affairs, who are working with the town populace and that kind of thing a little bit more.
Okay.
About reading the room. So can you share some examples? So let's say you're briefing a room full of commanders or decision makers, and you have to either share really tough news or really push back and play the devil's advocate. What are things that you're looking for in the room that also help adjust your communication and how you engage?
I mean, first and foremost, is anybody paying attention to my brief? There were times where you were talking about something and, there'd be a complete other conversation that was, volume that was not like sidebar. It was open, so you kind of have to read the room there. And is what I'm saying, are they picking it up quickly? And maybe, or are they picking it up and listening? And if not, maybe I step through a little bit more quickly and get to the more meat of it. But really, in that sort of a scenario, what I'm sharing is, oftentimes a one over the world. These are the threats facing the Marine Corps, and it depends on what the brief is. And a lot of the times, the general officers have gotten that brief, in writing to them, classified ahead of time. So it really just depended a little bit. But there certainly are times, there were some very difficult times at the start of the war that we did need to walk through, like some hairy situations, some complicated enemy situations as we're figuring out like what is the Iraqi army doing now they have fallen into plain clothes and are waging a insurgency against the US. So
Very cool. And me being a non-veteran here and also an international person, I grew up in Albania. So I'm like, when I hear intelligence officer, I picture like a CIA, like FBI, like those. Okay,
not quite as sexy.
Yeah, like a Bond, James Bond.
Yeah, not as many tuxedos or martinis.
Parties. So I'm curious for the audience, however much you can share, like what exactly is an intelligence officer, especially what your role was for 9 years. I think you mentioned you were sort of briefing very important people on what's happening outside of the U.S. But yeah, if you can be a bit more specific, that I'm sure a lot of people are very curious.
Sure. I mean, I was at the most tactical level of intelligence, leading a team that supported an infantry battalion, which a Marine infantry battalion can range anywhere from 500 to 800 Marines,
Wow.
depending on. So, that's about as small as you get in the intel world. And so they're focused on very tactical issues. How does the weather, the terrain affect the enemy movement, the enemy plan? And back then, there were no drones or, robots on the battlefield. So it was a very personal warfare. It was really personal. So that's what we are trying to gauge. How does terrain, how does it affect the enemy order of battle, and what impact does that have on friendly operations at that level? Moving up the chain, when I got to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that was awesome. That was it was exactly what I joined for. I mean, it was working with the CIA, DIA, NSA, and going out with a very small team to every crisis in the world, providing a direct link back if that commander needed something from the White House sit room. As a 25-year-old, I had authorization to call the White House sit room. I mean, it was really heady stuff. Yeah, it was so cool.
And what year are we talking about here? Sorry.
This is that tour I was in from 91 to 99. Very good question. And then 95 was around the era. So Bosnia was just, since you were nearby in Albania.
Yeah.
Bosnia was in the news. The Dayton Accord had just been signed. That's when I showed up right before that. And so we were the first troops into Bosnia to, with the trigger pullers, trying to give them a picture of what are they going to be facing.
Yeah, wow, very cool. And we had, very cool is probably not the appropriate term. In Albania, we had a civil war in 1997, and then Kosovo had a war with Serbia in 1998. And so you're talking about Bosnia. I was right there in the middle of it all as a child.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And I just going back to this question so here's what I picture an American intelligence officer. You go into some like special training and there's a room of like teaching you body language and teaching you like, I don't know, some Bosnian words. Like what was the training, as much as you're allowed to share, like what was training like?
So you're thinking this is it's a slight distinction, counterintelligence.
Okay.
Those are the people who basically it's twofold. They are oftentimes running agents and having to turn agents on a very, again, tactical level in the military. So it's not like a long drawn out James Bond or in the the Americans working as source for a real long time. This is like you're trying to get through this checkpoint. we can get you through the checkpoint with your family, but we need you to do X, sort of thing, making a source pretty quickly and getting
Yeah.
information from them. That's what
That's a
counter
lot of
intel folks
negotiation
do.
there. That's a huge
Exactly.
negotiation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what counter intel guys do, and that's
I see.
it's awesome stuff. They also prevent the enemy from spying on us. So
Right.
you're exactly right.
We need to have one of those on the podcast.
Yeah,
If
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
any
you're right about that.
counterintelligence,
yeah, bring them on for the next episode.
we'll help
That's
them get
right.
into tech. If they want to work at Google, we can help them.
And
So
they go through a lot of training just to
Yeah.
double click on what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
they absolutely are on how to work a source, how to develop a source, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. But you are implying that you didn't go through that type of training.
I didn't. No, mine was more so, like everything from, I mean, it's so dated now. This was like 35 years ago, Gerta, so
Yeah.
it was a while back. So it was
How
more
to use the
so,
Nokia. Yeah.
you're right, right. I don't even think Palm Pilots didn't even exist if you ever,
Oh,
see that in
wow.
a
yeah, I remember
museum.
those.
Yeah. So anyway.
Cool.
Yeah. So would love to hear, have you experienced any notable negotiation, whether in your military career or in your job right now, where you help people continue to rise up into executive positions? I mean, what kinds of negotiations do you face in your job? And are there any interesting ones that jump out at you?
And just to broaden the question, I'm actually curious about negotiations even outside of your current job. But again, whatever you're comfortable with, we'll keep it mysterious if we have to.
That's awesome. Not too mysterious. Pretty boring over here, Gerta, to be honest, which is a good thing in life at this point.
You're
You
you're
want
you're being too humble now, I'm sure. That's that military quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
maybe. But I mean, negotiations are a huge part of what we do. Both, I mean, on both sides of the business. In recruiting, of course, you have essentially two clients. One is referred to as the client in the industry because ultimately that who's getting the invoice and paying you, the hiring company. And then the other client, which is equally as important, is the candidate client, the person who is going through the process. And so there's a negotiation to ultimately, acquire the new corporate client as far as fee and all that goes into it and all about the search. And then there's a negotiation at the very end of the process with the candidate who's gone through, and that's their job offer if, an offer is being accepted. So certainly a lot of negotiation in what we do on a daily basis, bringing in new accounts, helping people, get offers that are really going to fire them up.
Yeah. So one thing I'm very curious about, because sometimes we have people who are interested in working with us who are applying to jobs, but they're working with a third-party recruiter.
Yes.
And one thing that we tell these clients and these people working with third-party recruiters, and I would love if you could shed some additional color on this, on how things work in the background, is to not necessarily, just to understand the third-party recruiter is helping you place you in the job, but then the incentives aren't 100% aligned in that a third-party recruiter, perhaps their incentive is just to make sure a candidate is closed, as opposed to absolutely maximizing the compensation for the offer that they're going to accept.
Like a real estate agent in a
Yeah,
way.
like maybe like some agent in real estate or things like that. So they're on your team, but then just to keep in mind that sure, they can probably help you negotiate a bit, but they're not going to perhaps go super deep in the weeds to really try to maximize and add an additional 10, 20, 50K plus to the offer. But I would love to know if you, like from your experience sitting in that middle position between the two clientele that you have, the job seekers as well as the companies, how it looks like on your end, what are you incentivized by, and how you help negotiate, handle and facilitate the negotiations.
Sure. So, I mean, we are incentivized by, overall offer package. But I mean, our number one company value, and it's a value that I have carried my entire career, is relationships over revenue always. So there's no placement fee worth it to me to sacrifice that,
Yes,
because
agree.
in this business, if you are not keeping in mind that today's candidate very likely could be, if you're doing things well, tomorrow's client, it's important to treat both as clients,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
one is invoicing and the other isn't. They both are clients, in my opinion. Where the negotiations come in, and if we are getting to that point at the offer phase where it's likely there's going to be a negotiation. I know the company's not coming in where the person wants. They have, they want to be here. They come in there. I will, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, I'll coach the individual on. First, I'll say, have you ever negotiated an offer before, and find out what their experience is. Ask a few questions, and then the next question: would you like some coaching? Usually, they say yes, and so I'll coach them on the negotiation, because I firmly believe that it is a lot easier for a company to say no to me, a third party vendor that they may or may not, hopefully they'll see us again and we're doing repeat business, but it's harder to say no to that employee, the person who you might have had dinner with already, you met their spouse throughout the interview process, you've had 8 interviews or whatever the number is for sometimes, and there's some rapport built. So I will usually have them negotiate in a perfect
Themselves.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And on that topic, yeah, it sounds like we're very aligned on, the importance of communication and humility, but still advocating for yourself and all that. Do you have any unconventional takes on negotiations or surprising things that, like your own personal principles?
My principles are like, I'm a pretty simple person, and I keep the negotiations pretty simple too. And again, as I talked about asking questions up front and what's your experience in negotiations, my other upfront question is, how would you feel? And every negotiation from a candidate perspective, it's a job offer. And I ask, how would you feel if this offer evaporated? It just,
Sorry, you
it
asked
went
this
away.
to the candidate.
Yeah. And if they're like, well, if they don't meet where I need to be, then that's okay. I will coach differently if they're like, oh, I don't want it to evaporate. No, I just was wondering if I could get an extra, blank. So finding out where the person is and how badly do they want it, and so that affects how I will coach them in negotiations. But let's say it's the latter and they really do want the role, but they feel like, and I will always also coach them, lead with facts. Like it is, leave the emotions out of it. Like it is no doubt a very emotional time for everybody. Like I am negotiating my compensation. And so people get, like you use the house, example, buying a house can be very emotional, but it shouldn't be. It's just an asset. So ultimately, I will let them leave the emotions out of it, focus on the facts, and approach the negotiation as if you, with a few points, as if you are an attorney, making your case in court. And that's kind of the mindset I try to get them in.
Yeah.
And what you just said made me think about how, we have clients that say, I had this one particular client who said, I was taking the sort of the intake, what has happened, what has been said. And as part of what they were sharing was like, oh, and I also am friends with a recruiter. And then they keep sharing something like, oh, you're friends with a recruiter. How do you know them? And they said, oh, I don't know her. I met her through the job, but we're friends because we're on a texting basis. And so I think the recruiter was being very smart. I'm sure they're also kind to be so friendly, but also very smart, because if the candidate thinks they're friends with the recruiter, that means their guard is down. And this question that you ask, I mean, you're the middle entity in this case, but a recruiter who makes you believe that you're friends, and they could ask you this, like, how would you feel if the offer evaporated? they're extracting so much information out of you from a question that seems so simple. Like, yeah, it's showing, do you have other options? How excited you are about them. There's so much packed into your answer. But of course, candidates are not negotiating day in and day out the way recruiters are and the way we are. And so they could answer that truthfully and like, I would be devastated. And so now the negotiation will go a certain direction rather than the other. So I was just reminded from what you said, just for, candidates to be very careful on how they answer and how they respond to questions.
Yeah, our goal ultimately is to, make both people happy,
Right.
which is
Of course.
not always easy.
Right. And that's our goal too. Yeah. We always say expand the pie, have win-win deals.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Have everybody be happy. You'd be surprised what percentage of placements do work out that way. Like it's very often that somebody's accepting a job offer grumbling. Most of the time they're pretty darn stoked, and there are tons of examples where after hanging up the phone on this sort of offer negotiation call, after somebody successfully nailed the sign-on bonus, the increase in pay, whatever, I just look at a colleague back in the day and be like, that is the easiest $20,000 they will ever earn.
Right.
Yeah.
And it really is. You can significantly increase, and in a good negotiation, even if it's just, let's say it's just base salary, it's not equity or anything else, but that base salary carries on year after year after year. So it truly is. I mean, I helped someone with a negotiation last week, and it wasn't a massive amount. But when you think about, like, even if it's 10 or 15K over 5 years, well, it's 75 grand if there's no increased compensation in at all. And you assume that there will be based on performance. So yeah, where you start is important for your overall earnings. And that's the way I try to have people in the job hunt look at it, and take it that seriously.
Yeah, one thing we try to emphasize in all the content that we share and in our coaching and when we talk to clients is if you don't negotiate today, it's not that you're not negotiating your pay today, but it impacts all of your future pay. Because when you
100%.
continue to go rise up in your career, maybe the next job that you get, you would just have an internal benchmark of how much you were paid previously, and all of that compounds over time. So just not getting that 10, 20K today and not going for it,
Or 100K.
or 100K, it could potentially
Yeah.
translate to millions of compensation over your entire career, right? So it really does impact things for the long term. One thing I was really curious about, because you have a unique position being able to see both the candidate side as well as the company side, are there certain things that you have seen in your experience that will lead to a company deciding to increase the comp? Is it something perhaps that the candidate does? Is it the way that they communicate things? Or are there certain patterns that you've seen that ultimately have a company be like, okay, we should actually give this person more?
Competing offers.
Yes.
Sure. Yes,
Yep.
yes.
100%.
Right. I mean, that'll do it sometimes, a lot of the
For
time.
sure.
Yeah, it is. Like some of it is performance in the interview, undoubtedly. Like they bring in a rock star and the CEO meets them and they're just like, oh, wow. We have not had this kind of level of talent. We get that a lot in where we are placing folks, where and a lot of our work has been in the private equity space, in the aggregators. So these are companies, the holdco's been set up, there's a thesis that is ready to be executed on, and they are going about, acquiring companies. And often where we are, they are forgotten industries, so very blue collar. And in that space, it is like for most of our PE partners, people leadership is part of their value creation strategy. And so then you introduce the veteran leadership, and it's holy cow, especially leading these blue collar teams. It's amazing how well they've done. But in general, sometimes in those industries, the talent pool is where the talent pool is. And so you bring in somebody who's a Wharton MBA, they're a veteran, they have been on elite teams, they've had multiple levels of challenging selection, then add in, they have a couple of years at Goldman or an MBB or whatever, and then they're going in to run these businesses. Like they are lethal. They know what levers to pull in a P&L for growth. And so we are leveling up the organization in many cases, just to a whole new candidate pool. So that's been pretty awesome. And in those, where we really can impact negotiation too, and lifelong earnings is in equity, and where there may not be equity, you know, that person who they love, if they're stuck on cash and can't do more cash, then you bring in equity. But that's another angle, and certainly if they get the results the company wants, it can be a massive payout.
So you also work with those who are moving from maybe middle management or kind of mid-career and accelerate into executive roles. Is that right?
Yes, that's primarily who we're
And
working with.
what have you seen are the qualities that really have someone successfully break into the executive tier? I think there a lot of the advice out there is often it feels cliche or kind of is like corporate polish and things like that. But are there certain very specific qualities or patterns that you've seen that really have someone succeed breaking into upper leadership?
In the pool, the candidate pool we're representing are all veterans. So I mean, the leadership piece is I don't want to say it's taken for granted, but that is what they're looking for oftentimes. Inspiring leadership, execution ability, a bias for action. Being able to make decisions, be forward moving, KPI, accountability. All of those traits. When we're placing somebody into one of these, early stage startup holdcos or defense techs, whatever it is, that those are all the reasons they want to hire our people.
Very diplomatic answer. We were hoping for some like qualities that do not that don't help you get into leadership.
Gerta especially loves the hot
spicy.
takes.
Let's hear it. Well, I'm open to it. So
Okay, can I ask a bit more like spicy? So for example,
Sure.
one thing that I observe about the military is that it's about rule following. And so it's very structured. Like you said, the salaries are already predetermined. You are taught to follow the rules a lot, not question things. And I get that. I get that if like it's life or death in many occasions, you just want to execute. You don't want to ask questions. How do you balance that? Like, how do you think about that in the context of there's also leadership that are good qualities in the military, and so do you just have both and they're separate in like different people have different strengths, or can you find both of those in the same person? Has that follower mindset, have you seen that getting in the way of your candidates getting the right job or a good comp?
Every veteran, especially if they've been in for more than just the initial, like if they enlisted and they were in for 3 years, maybe not in that case, but you do figure out pretty quickly, especially as a young officer, when you're in a leadership role and when you're not, like when you need to follow and when you need to lead. I think there are, Garrett says, some just standard kind of assumptions that they are, rule followers and so forth, but there is a whole part of the military that is labeled unconventional. And that and it is also a part of the military we are tapping into significantly. It's just, the individual who can be dropped into any situation. They have a very high FITFO, which if you're not familiar with that acronym is figure it the F out, sort of. And it's really what they look for in unconventional, service members is that figure it out factor. And so there they are needing to execute in extremely austere and challenging and dangerous situations with no support. Like zero. They have the mission, they know what they need to do, they know how to do it, but how they're going to do it, they figure it out on the job, and so then take that individual and apply that exact same scenario to where we are placing them, which is we're building the plane while it's flying. We got a thesis, we're going out and acquiring companies, we have a playbook, but however, how all that comes together, we're going to figure it out as we go. Like, they go hand in hand, and that's also extremely unconventional in business. It's not like they're showing up to IBM or something that's been around forever. So I don't know. I'd challenge any assumption about the just a rule follower and order taker sort of thing.
I do think the veterans especially have and I know this is such a common phrase, the bias towards action.
Yeah.
I saw this thing the other day about how there are those who say, I'll start once I'm ready or once I figure it out. And then there's another bucket of people who say, I'm going to start now and I'll figure it out along the way. And I think that veterans, because many have been in situations where it's literally life or death, or there's a lot on the line and decisions need to be made quickly, like they kind of have this quality. And I think that it's, but then the problem is veterans also then tend to undersell themselves. I think they really need to highlight how they have accomplished things by leaning on this bias towards action muscle.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're right about
you're
that,
looking
Alex.
at me.
I'm like, I feel like I'm not gonna get any raw answers from Jim. So
No, go
moving
for it.
on.
I'm wide open. I'd love to. I'd love to. It's been like I
Ready to learn
told you,
the
Gerta, a little
waterboarding.
boring. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Moving on. Jim, how are you thinking about AI? Because that's very top of mind here in Silicon Valley. So, well, first, are you worried about like it taking Milvet's, I guess, edge? We have to think about it a lot because people are turning to ChatGPT and all the other AI chats. There's that. There's the now there a lot of mass layoffs, so companies probably need fewer people. And then also, are veterans up to date on the latest AI? Because I don't know how much the military is training them on AI. Anything AI related.
Yeah, so all of the above, yes. I'm nervous about it. I am preparing for it. We use it every single day in our business. Like most businesses, the routine, mundane tasks, it's been phenomenal, taking that work off our plate. So everything from any brief writing, it could be, I mean, even we're using it to help with our website development. Pretty incredible. It's our
Right.
Claude has really performed well as a CFO that we have not hired yet. So
Really?
it's incredible. But of course, I think there are a lot of services businesses that are not like physical, like I'm putting in your HVAC, but these sorts of services, could we be outdone by AI? Who knows? I'm most concerned about building the most awesome, biggest business we can have at the Milvet and keeping our culture while we do it and servicing more and more of the population. But it's a concern. We are running through a schedule with our team as far as like, how do we use AI? There's no thing too small. I want to list it out, capture that, and then ultimately try to come up with a strategy, which we don't have yet. Now it's been piecemeal. We're all figuring it out for ourselves, but I do want to have more of a strategic approach.
Yeah, I think it is pretty incredible how fast AI is impacting what people do in their jobs. I was just talking to one of my old coworkers. I worked at a Web3 blockchain company before we started our company. He is an engineering manager at that company, so manages a whole team of engineers, writing code, all this stuff. I left that company about 2 years ago. I just had a call with him the other day, and I was asking him about how AI has impacted his work. And he says, I almost never write a single line of code anymore. I basically just we've created agents, and I basically just manage a team of AIs to go write the code. And he was saying how he said what would take a few weeks. I basically just go in the morning. I give all the AIs their instructions. I have them go off. I go eat lunch. I come back, and then it's done. And then I usually will just review their work, and I might have to code here and there to kind of fix things. But then I usually also just tell them to fix things, and then I go and have my snack in the afternoon, and I come back. And it's pretty incredible. And I think this is such a big thing for those who are applying for jobs. No matter what your function is, whether you're an engineer or product manager, if you're a copywriter, I think it's so important to use AI because the expectation now is you know how to use AI to compound and accelerate your work.
Your own work.
Yes.
And if you're not doing that, I think you're falling behind by the week.
Yeah.
And
100%.
yeah.
And I think because everything is changing so fast, that's why I assume you mentioned you don't have a clear plan yet, because there's a new capability every week nowadays. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think what worries me personally is that I don't want people to think that because there's fewer jobs, they have to accept the first offer. I think it's especially important right now because we don't know what the future holds, that we don't leave money on the table. Whatever is available there, we take it so that it compounds and you're not expanding the gap throughout your career. But you were going to say something?
Completely agree. Yeah, we'll know where we are with AI. I mean, AI in a year, it'll be very different from where we are right now. It's fast, furious, scary if you're paying attention to all the investments in like the drone space and the armaments for the drone space and all that. Like it's going to be a highly lethal world that we're living in, more so than it is today.
Yeah, it changes so fast. I mean, Gerta and I joke, both of us have always been very regretful of not majoring in computer science in college because we're like, we didn't know how to, we weren't actually educated and trained in web development. And then now we live in a world.
We were very technical though.
We both have tech, like Gerta's a math major, I did systems engineering, and but then we didn't actually learn Python in college. And now we're like, okay, wow, things have changed so much that we don't have to, we didn't have to learn it. Like we spent all that time developing other important skills, maybe soft skills, communications, things that are very important. And actually in today's job market, we are seeing that the soft skills are even more important than they were before. And especially with our clients, is because it's such a tough market. By the time that a company has whittled down to their final list of candidates, everyone is more than qualified from a technical perspective to be able to execute the job. So then the thing that actually separates who will get the offer and who's going to get put on pause is, do they have the right soft skills? Can they communicate? Are they the right culture fit? Do they seem excited for this role? It's all these other intangible things, not the can they write a line of code, because that just isn't as important today anymore, right?
Almost every placement we're making is all on the intangibles, Alex. It
really?
is all the soft skills. It's because it's not do you understand how to engineer this or experience coding that. It's leading people leaders. So it's all soft skills, and those soft skills, in the investor space, like they want to win through leadership, and that's. It can really move the needle getting the right person in there, as we all know.
Yeah. So if there was probably on a final note, for those who are listening, who are whether they are a veteran transitioning to private sector, whether they're going from mid-career and breaking into exec, or those who are changing industries, is there one piece of advice that you think is super important for them that you think is directly related to how successful they can be in making that move?
Without a doubt, keep an eye on your long-term career and protect it. You see people who are extremely skillful. I'm working with one now, and it's painful. Just multiple short stints, a little bit mercenary in his career, going for this, going for that. And after 4 one-year stints, companies kind of wonder. So just as you're making these decisions, you're worried about the here and the now and the today. But I also would really encourage people, make long-term career decisions and you will not regret them. And sometimes it may mean, especially, I know we talked about pivoting careers, transitioning. It may mean in that very first to get into an industry, taking a little bit of a step back to take a long step forward.
Yeah. I was going to make a joke, like take a blue collar job because those are protected from AI.
Good, so that's where you see all these Harvard MBAs, McKinsey alum running HVAC, plumbing, electrical companies. Part of the reason is there's a couple different reasons. One, how long do you want to be a consultant, leaving your family for 4 days a week, going wherever? Two, they miss leading. They miss that execution piece. They if they're a consultant, they're working on a project, they leave it, and the execution is not their problem. But they love that part of it. And they want to be back in a leadership role and don't want to be AI'd out of existence. So that's a lot of the reason why vets are really fired up about kind of the work that we're doing and the areas where we're placing people.
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity there that people don't realize because it's not what most people think about.
It's not attractive.
It's not attractive.
But we have friends who bought like a laundry business and they're
And I'm specifically thinking about my friend Brian. He went to Harvard Business School. came.
Former
Yeah, he was my Air Force. We knew each other from the Air Force. Went to Harvard Business School. Started a search fund, and I believe he bought a business that is very much in the. It's like sensors for medical devices or something, but it's something that is just very. It's in every hospital. It's not sexy. It's kind of boring, but one of my favorite podcasters, Scott Galloway, he says the more boring the industry or the company is, the more likely that it's a very high revenue generating company.
Yeah.
Like the
Highly
sexier it is,
profitable.
if you're in like media and arts and like those tend to have a discount for how much you can get paid because they bank on the fact that people want to break into something that feels hot and cool to pay them less, right?
Definitely. And in America, we are seeing soon this generation of boomers as they retire. There's 5 million businesses that are going to not have succession plans, or at least in America, they're going to change hands. Most don't have a succession plan. So
Yeah.
the
So
ETA
interesting.
space is very hot
Yeah,
for
that's
a
What's
number
very
of reasons.
what's ETA?
Entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Got it. Oh, like search
It's
funds.
That's very interesting
yes.
because we are getting more and more into the merger and acquisition space, and including acquihires. So maybe we should tap into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you need to hire GMs and leaders, that's where we
For
can
sure.
absolutely pitch in and help. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Awesome.
I think maybe I'll do the final question,
Yeah.
which is any last thoughts on what do you think of like power and negotiations? What when you think of power and negotiations separately, and gentle power or military power, like what how do you think about them? Like how do you think about utilizing power and how do you relate to it?
If it's negotiation again, if it's somewhere where they want to work with that team, the job seeker has power. They may not feel like it. I'd say first and foremost, know that you do. And that power is no, I decline if it's not for them. So, but there's, using gentle power is phenomenal, obviously, in like, maybe there's another competing opportunity that's moving toward the end and just, sprinkling that into the conversation. Like I'm not unavailable next week. I have another option that I'm pursuing and whatever, I can be available to meet with you the following week or whatever. So, there's a place for gentle power that does not wreck a future relationship. And that's truly also what I try to coach people on is like, you're going to work with them. You want to get what you want. I mean, what is the goal of negotiating? More.
Expand the pie.
Yeah, more.
More.
Yeah. So that's it. So it's like there's a way to get more without, turning everybody off. And that's what I try to really help them with.
Yeah, that is one of our main principles in our company, which is to negotiate in a way where you are at the very least maintaining, if not strengthening your relationship with the parties involved by the end of the negotiation. So whether that means you've helped expand the pie from what was available before, whether you have collaborated with them in a very productive way to find creative solutions that just make both sides feel better off. And I really like your focus on relationships because especially as you progress in your career, the working world gets smaller and smaller. You'll probably
Yes.
encounter people again. And so to not think about negotiations in a vacuum, but we always say you're playing infinite games.
100%.
Because the negotiation today may be impacting also a relationship later on in the future as well.
Completely agree. Yes. And the person's reputation is everything. You have one shot at building a great reputation.
How can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
There's a number of ways, Alex. Thanks so much.
All right.
Yeah, we have our podcast, the Milvet podcast, which Gerta, glad you were a guest. That's awesome. That was probably before my time. We're on LinkedIn, of course. You can't miss our webpage, The Military Veteran, but also me. I post a lot on LinkedIn. And then our website, of course, is themilvet.org, and that's a good place to find us. It's under renovation. I mean, it's up, it's running, but we're renovating it currently, and I'll have a new one by Q2.
Okay,
very
cool. Wait, was that one? Will that one be designed by AI?
Claude.
We're using Affirm and then we're using Claude and we're trying to figure out which is the best.
Very cool.
Nice. Well, we will be sure to include
Yes,
all the links in the show notes here. But
Wonderful.
Jim, thank you so
so
much for
much.
coming on the podcast. I know that we were there was a bit of scheduling and it took us a while to lock it in, but I'm so glad we did. It was
Yes. Please let us know next time you're in town. I know you were here recently. We didn't manage to get rid of all our boxes before you got here. I had one last question, which is like, were we supposed to call you Jim by your ranking, or how does it work in the military?
I gave that up a very long time ago, Gerta, but I
Okay, so
appreciate that.
we
Jim
didn't make
is
a
most
faux pas the
preferred.
entire. I was like,
That's
are we making a
awesome.
faux pas the entire episode? Okay.
Never. No.
It's
Yeah.
funny. I think, Jim, things that are very obvious for you and me, having been in the military, I'm always reminded, especially like Gerta will ask certain questions, how not obvious it is for people who are
Civilians.
not, who didn't serve. So yeah, Gerta will sometimes ask me things like just no little things that I'm just like, wait, of course I still don't salute military people if I see them on the street.
Yeah.
You know, it's but I think we take for granted the experience often that we had, and we just feel like, you know, it was our duty. We're really glad we did it, but there are a lot of questions always, I think, from outside of the world we came from.
Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much again.
Thank you, Gerta. Thank you, Alex. It was my pleasure.
All right, it was a pleasure having you on. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.